As most of you know, I'm your town moderator, Bob Hiss. Welcome to this annual fall town meeting of 2017. Having been advised by our town clerk, Susan Galvin, that a majority of our town meeting members are in attendance, I hereby declare that a quorum is present for the transaction of business, and this meeting is now open. In keeping with tradition, we will start our meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. Will the membership please stand and join with me? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Before proceeding with the business of the meeting, however, there are certain preliminary matters to be taken up. First, permission has been granted for certain members and personnel of the school committee, planning board, board of health, and other boards, committees, and departments who are not town meeting members to sit on the floor with other members of their respective boards, committees, and departments, upon the understanding, of course, that they will not vote. Hearing no objection from the body, such permission will be and hereby is accorded. Second, permission is granted to our crack staff at Milton Cablevision up in the booth to televise these proceedings. Also, please note that there is two side aisle microphones here and here, each with 3 seats in the front on this side and that side reserved for those waiting to be recognized to speak. Third, I will now entertain a motion to continue to use the rules for the conduct of our annual town meeting in May as the rules for this meeting. There's a second. All those in favor? Opposed? The motion carries. This year we will have several articles that will require a 2/3 vote, and I'll inform you of those before we vote on those motions. And I do have one announcement from our Americans with Disabilities Act coordinator. Fragrances cause significant adverse reactions in some people, such as migraine headaches. Products with strong fragrances include personal care products such as perfume, colognes, fragrance hair products, aftershave lotion, etc. Attendees at town meeting are requested to avoid products with fragrances as an accommodation to persons with such adverse reactions and to allow safe and free access to the auditorium, the lobby, and restrooms. Attendees at town meeting who are wearing products with fragrances or who think they may be wearing products with fragrances are requested to sit away from the section near the lobby area. So we're trying to reserve this area up here for those who have sensitivities. So let me briefly explain tonight's schedule. I'd like to begin with a short statement from the Director of Veteran Services, Kevin Cook. Mr. Cook could not be here tonight. He's at some mandatory training with the state. In brief, the Town of Milton and the Office of Veteran Services announced this year's Veterans Day observance, which will be held on Saturday, November 11, 2017 at 11 a.m. at Milton's Town Hall. Milton's Board of Selectmen and Director of Veteran Services, Kevin Cook, along with members of the the American Legion Post 114, will conduct ceremonies to commemorate veterans past and present. Included in this ceremony will be the dedication of a POW MIA chair, which will be located in the foyer at Town Hall. It is a sign that Milton will keep a chair open for all our POW MIAs until they all return home. This year's ceremony will be to pay tribute all of Milton's Vietnam veterans, and Milton's Challenge Coin will be awarded to all Vietnam veterans in attendance. If you are a Vietnam veteran and would like to participate in this year's observance, please contact Kevin J. Cook at the Milton Veterans Office at 617-898-4939. The ceremony honoring all veterans will begin promptly at 11 a.m. with a procession down Canton Avenue to Town Hall beginning at 10:30 a.m. If you have any questions, you may contact the Selectman's Office at 898-4843 for additional answers. A couple notes. You may have noticed when you walked in tonight there was a legal size spreadsheet filled with eye chart size data. That was in response to a question that Mr. Morash asked at our Maytown meeting about the status of the town's revolving funds. So our town accountant, Amy Dexter, provided those answers, printed them up, put them up here in response to Mr. Morash's question, and henceforth those will be included in the annual report so that you'll have access to that information going forward. Second, I did have a request. I think you'll notice we're trying to keep the documents here on this table to be only those pertinent to town business and sponsored by the individual article. So to avoid putting in free coupons for dry cleaning and car washes. If you could put that stuff outside in the lobby, that would be much appreciated. I've got 2 short presentations tonight. The first recognized Mike Zulis, who Mike is going to talk to something about forming a band. Mike, do I have that right, or am I slightly off? Right.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mike Zulis, Precinct 3 Town Meeting Member. Oh, hello, testing. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mike Zulis, Precinct 3 Town Meeting Member. And we may have it. That's all right. Is that all right? Happens to all of you. So let me start while we're bringing up just a couple of slides. My request of all of you is that you answer in a clear, loud voice one question, and that is there anyone in this auditorium tonight who is unhappy with their Comcast internet? All right, well, have I got a deal for you? Oh, there it is. Can we have the next slide? The Milton Municipal Broadband Initiative seeks to energize residents, town officials, and institutions in town to look at and explore alternatives to Comcast Internet. The Board of Selectmen has decided to form a committee to look into this, and we want to tap into the resources and to the talents in town to try to support that committee as much as possible. So if you're not familiar with the problem is Comcast Internet. It is a monopoly, and as a result, when you have a monopoly, you have high prices, you have old technology from the 1880s, not the 1980s, the 1880s, which is Back to the Future Part 3, not Back to the Future Part 1. You have old technology, and you have less than stellar service. So, what do we do about that? One solution is a municipal fiber optic broadband network. And there is the solution. If we do that, everything will be great. We'll have lower prices, we'll have better technology, we'll have better service, we'll have, 3-day weekends, we'll have spring throughout the year, we'll have no traffic congestion, we'll have no airplane noise, and by golly, we'll have the cutest little park in East Milton Square that you ever did see. So anyway, our effort is to bring together people who are interested in that. So, next slide, please. We have a meeting next Monday night at the Keys Room in the library, lower level of the library, 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock. Anyone who's interested in this idea and in helping out with this, please join us. Also, you can email Milton Municipal Fiber at yahoo.com. It just occurred to me. Fiber optic is a lot like fiber in your diet, isn't it? How is that? Both fiber optic and fiber in your diet help to move things along a lot more quickly and a lot more smoothly. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think I'm out with that. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
It's open mic night here at town meeting. So I have just a short proposal I wanted to present to the body tonight, and that's not it, but we'll get it. Let me give you some background. So I'm coming up here so I can see the presentation, by the way. So I'm a member of the Mass Moderators Association, and I've been researching ways to go make our town meeting more efficient. And there's this concept called the consent agenda, and I wanted to introduce that concept to the body tonight, propose it as an idea for our May 28 town meeting, and I'm just trying to get this idea out in traffic and get your reaction to it. So let's see if my clicker works. So here's the definition. The idea is that a motion is made by the warrant committee to group a number of non-controversial articles together under the first article, And then, with some exceptions, there's an opportunity to vote on all of them at once. You can imagine what some of those might be. There's a partial list on the right of towns in the Commonwealth that have done this. So it's quite common across the state to see this published in articles. You could do a web search on any of these towns and you'd find something called the consent article, the consent agenda, the consent calendar. There's different names for it. So what I did in order to see how this might apply to us is I went back to our May 2017 town meeting where we had 52 articles. And I did some analysis. So first you can see I categorized them by type. We had administrative, we borrowed money, we had a lot of budget, et cetera. So there's that first column of the total articles is 52. I then keep a record of who stands up to speak about an article. And I counted how many of those different types of articles had a speaker. And there were 32. And then I said, how many of you got up from the floor to ask a question? Because there was something about it you didn't know, you didn't understand, whatever it was. And there were 43 where there were no questions involved. I then went to look for which of those articles could pass with a simple majority, just 50%, versus the 2/3 for zoning, for example. And there were, if I can see I think it's 46 passed with a simple majority. So I then went across the rows and said, well, how many of these things had no speaker, no questions, and simple majority? And came up with about 17 different items that apparently the body felt were so easily understood and routine that they weren't worth taking up a whole lot of time, and you just passed them. So the idea would be that next year, if I can get my clicker to go, I would do the following. And this is just a proposal. I want to socialize this again. It's not locked in stone. Just want to get it out there. So the moderator meets with the warrant committee before the warrant is published. And based on all their interaction with the sponsors, they listen for which of these might be non-controversial. They gather those all in one Article 1, and they make a recommendation to approve all the non-controversial ones with one vote. Then we open up town meeting with Article 1, and the moderator would read through a short list, and I've got an example of what that looks like, of all the articles that are in the consent agenda. And if any 5 town meeting members raise their hands and say, I have a question, it's removed from the consent agenda and it's addressed in its normal order as a separate thing. Okay? So here's an example. So I went back and I had an imaginary May 2017 town meeting, and I pulled some text from another town. So this is sample text. So it says it's recommended, as you can see it here, blah, 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 that we'll vote as a group. 5 members can pull it out, and it'll pass with a 2/3 majority vote. And I listed on the right, I had to do a little renumbering, but these are the actual titles of the articles that I think have had no speakers, no questions, and were simple majorities. I pulled all the budget ones out, by the way. And if someone said, you know, I've got a question on Article 12, it would be removed from the consent agenda. We wouldn't vote on it. When we're all done, we vote on this. And we have a chance to maybe get a dozen and a half articles done quite quickly. So what the consent agenda looks like, if I can just get the last click. Could you advance for me, Emily, please? This is a sample from the town of Concord. It's pulled right from one of their warrants. So what you'd see is in Article 1, a quick report of here's what the article is, here's what the recommendation of the warrant committee is, and here's their rationale for why it's in the consent agenda. It's housekeeping, it's accepting the report of the annual report of the town, it's that kind of thing. And then the full detail of these articles is still printed in the agenda so you can read them, hear the whole warrant committee's recommendation. The whole rest of the text is there to answer your questions. This is just a way to get some of the housekeeping done early. So with that, what's next? So I'm just, again, introducing this idea, looking for your input, but not tonight. So you want to find out if you love it. Do you hate it? Bob, you're thinking way too small. Bob, you're thinking way too big. Bob, just please stop thinking and let's get on to special town meeting. So with that, just email me at rhis@townofmilton.org, and happy to have a conversation about this. So, thanks. With that, we'll proceed to Article 1, which is found on page 8. Article 1, to see if the town will vote to amend the vote of the 2017 Milton Annual Town Meeting under Article 22, amending certain amounts as set forth in the table below. Again, as my practice, I'll just read the totals. So water enterprise revenue, the current recommended is $6,557,624. Addition reduction of 0, revised recommended $655,624. The water enterprise cost total, same number, $655,624, and the revised $655,624, and to act on anything related thereto. Let's see, does anyone wish to speak to this motion? Yes, sir.
Hi, Steve McCurdy from Precinct 7, town meeting member. I rise in opposition. I think that while I would like to have a share of the $430,000 in my pocket, the same as everybody else, that there are certainly more compelling uses for that money. First of all, I think that using carryover money from a prior year to subsidize this year's rates does create a sort of using one-time funds for a recurring cost issue, which, and if that bothers you from a financial perspective, it does me. There's the potential that next year we're going to have to come up with an additional 430 to make that up. But in the bigger sense, the problem is that we have a management plan, a master plan for our water system that suggests that we ought to be replacing about 15,000 feet of pipe a year, and we're only replacing about 6,000 feet per year. And old pipe tends to crack, old pipe tends to leak. When it leaks, you're paying the MWRA for putting water in the ground. So it's just not a financially sound thing. Brakes are expensive, brakes are disruptive. We have about 20 a year. We've had 60 from the DPW's count over the last 3 years. And if you're still skeptical, we have several miles of unlined pipe in town, unlined cast iron pipe. And I brought a cross-section that I got from my friends at the Boston Water and Sewer. And that's what 4-inch pipe can tend to look like after 100 years. It's tuberculated. If you can see the silver, that's the outside of the pipe, and in the middle it's clogged up. So you lose pressure. Bacteria and things can grow on all these surfaces, and it's not good. So we should be doing everything that we can to get toward that 15,000 feet and not making ourselves feel good in the short term by saving a few bucks. So again, I oppose this, and I hope you will vote with me. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Selectman David Burns.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. And first off, thank you to all of you town meeting members for all the good work that you put in to make our government as efficient as it is. And thank you to the Warrant Committee and the Planning Board for all the hard work you've done on these articles. And thank you, Madam Clerk, for all the good work you've done. Mr. Moderator, I'd like to ask to recognize our Department of Public Works Director, Chase Berkeley, to speak in detail about this article.
Please do. Yep.
Chase Berkeley, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator and Madam Clerk and members of the Warrant Committee, the Board of Selectmen, and most importantly, town meeting members. Very evident to me in my short time here since July as Public Works Director that the town, the residents of this town go above and beyond when it comes to public service and offering their own time. So I just want to let you know it is recognized that everyone in this room is here because they have a duty to civic service as town employees do. So thank you for that. This article is, as Mr. Morris said, taking excess revenues from fiscal year 17 and using them to offset what would be a necessary increase in water rates only due to MWRA increases. So when you're an MWRA community, particularly Milton, where we are both water and sewer, your biggest debt service is the year billed from the MWRA. So in general, if MWRA raises the bill, we need to raise the bill to compensate for that. So what happened in fiscal year 17 is sales exceeded what the water rates were designed to raise in revenue, and we attribute that mostly to the drought conditions we saw the previous summer. So we sold a lot more water than we normally do, and we also sold water at the highest tier, which is where it's the most expensive. So we have a system in place where as you purchase more water, that water becomes more expensive per gallon. So as a result, we earned more money on that most expensive water than what was planned the previous year. The difficulty in setting water rates is you have to use last year's information and predict what's going to happen the following year. So there's always a balance, and sometimes you hit it right, sometimes you fall short, sometimes you go over. When you fall short, we have surplus revenues or reserves to cover those shortfalls in the Water Enterprise Fund. In this case, where we exceeded our target revenue, we could choose to put that money back into the surplus, or in this case, we are choosing to, or asking to, apply that money to what would be a necessary rate increase. So I just wanted to outline our thinking behind this. We used the same rate consultant this year as we have over the past decade, and these recommendations have been vetted through their rate modeling and are agreed upon and were presented to the Board of Selectmen and voted upon unanimously.
Mr. Berkeley, could you speak a
Yes.
little closer? Some people have
Yeah,
trouble
actually,
hearing.
I'm all set, so, yep. Yeah.
Well,
And, just on a side note, this is my very first town meeting, so thank you for being so welcoming. And thank you to everyone who has welcomed me in the town.
Mr. Mullen, you're recognized.
Peter Mullen, Precinct 2. Test. Peter Mullen, Precinct 2. In the comment, it says that the retained earnings balance in the Water Enterprise Fund remains at a prudent level. I wonder if somebody can tell us what that level is and whether we're turning back half the retained earnings or a small percentage, what that number is.
Mr. Berkeley, do you have an answer for us? Thank you.
See, nobody told me the rule, don't go back to your seat till it's over, right? So in round numbers, our retained earnings right now are about 40 to 50% of our operating budget. So sound accounting practices say we should run 5 to 10% of our operating budget. So it's a non-authorized number, but the number is about $3.4 million in surplus, and our fiscal year 18 operating costs are 6.5, the number's up there, million. So the 430 is the percentage of 3.4 million.
Anyone else wish to speak to this article? Mr. Mahalchik?
Mike Mahalchik, Precinct 7. I just want to know if, Chase, you could respond to what Steve McCurdy said about the miles and miles of clogged up pipes that are leaking all over town, the progress towards ameliorating that.
Yeah, so it's no hidden secret that the infrastructure in this country is dated and is in desperate need of funding, and we hear it at the local, state, and national levels that infrastructure stimulus is a very important topic. So Milton is no different than any other town or similar city in this area of the country, being when the pipes were installed and what shape they're in. I think the important thing is to recognize there are creative ways to fund that work, and there are opportunities where grant money and 0% interest loan money can be sought after to put towards that. And this rate recommendation does not change our capital plan or does not reduce our capital plan for what it was intended. But as the new Director of Public Works, I will certainly be seeking to look at every way we can increase the amount of pipe we replace and rehabilitate.
Anyone else wish to speak to this article? This requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? The motion carries. Article 2. Ladies and gentlemen, you should have picked up at the table a white sheet of paper, which is the revised recommendation for Article 2. So just an explanation, you will notice in the warrant that the warrant was printed with one version of Article 2. The Town Government Study Committee made some structural edits to it. Town Council reviewed those. I reviewed those for scope. I determined that they are within the scope since they left the intent of the article as published in the warrant intact, but merely changed the structure of the wording by moving paragraphs around primarily. They brought that to the warrant committee, I think it was a week ago Monday. The warrant committee approved the new wording. That means it's accepted as a friendly amendment, does not require a vote. So this is the new replacement that you should have handed out up here for the Article 2 printed in your warrant. So with that, it's a lengthy article. I would entertain a motion to waive the reading. All in favor of waiving the reading, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. We will waive the reading. So with that, I'd like to recognize Rick Neely, who's the chairman of the Town Government Study Committee, in order to be able to speak. We're out of handouts. They were also, I also note they were also mailed out to you all last week. And I think they were, emails were sent around to every town meeting member that has an email address on file with the town clerk. And we're now displaying the revised version up on the screen. We should be as well. Yes, Mr. Neely.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, members of town meeting. I want to give you a little background in terms of why we have this article before you tonight. The history of this is that you recall that the Town Government Study Committee requested that the Department of Revenue come in, and the Board of Selectmen agreed to take a look at all of town government. And you recall there was a report, which I have here and you've heard about in the past. And in that report, the Department of Revenue, one of its many recommendations was in looking at the structure of town government, had a recommendation with regard to the HR roles and duties in town government. And it included, for example, expanding the responsibilities of the existing Assistant Town Administrator for Human Resources. In that recommendation, quote, on filling the human resource position, the board's work would be duplicative and it could be eliminated. That was sort of the genesis of why our committee took a look at this discussion and looked at this article. And we began some of this with a discussion with the then chairman of the Personnel Board in November of 2015. He came to our meeting and we talked about the Personnel Board and what the duties were and what the vision for the future was and what changes would be needed, if any. After that, we met with the chairman of the Board of Selectmen at that time and the then town administrator, and we discussed a number of topics for our committee to look at. Included was the Personnel Board. So we took that as one of the topics we were looking at. And over a period of the last 19 months, we've been reviewing the way other towns have maintained or changed or continue to have a personnel board or human resources board. And you have to understand that the history of the personnel board is that it goes back some 60 years. So the Chapter 13 article was created back in the 50s, in the days when there were no unions that bargained for the employees' wages and salaries and benefits, or had the grievance procedures that are in the contracts. In those days, the town had no professional management. There was no executive secretary, which was created in the 60s. There was no town manager or town administrator. What's really happened over the last 50 some odd years is the executive secretary position was created and it became a town administrator. This body in the last couple of years approved an expansion of the duties to a strong town administrator, and that's the model of government we have today, along with an assistant town administrator for HR, along with the other addition of professional positions for the town management. Next year, we'll in addition have 5 members of the Board of Selectmen. In addition, that's another change that was approved by this body and by the voters. So as we looked at all of this, we looked at what other towns are doing. We looked at a series of towns that have some comparability to the town of Milton. And we went through and we determined, after hearing what the Department of Revenue had to say,
are towns eliminating the personnel board? And in some cases, the answer is yes. And in 3 comparable examples, Situate, Dedham, and Westboro, they did do that. And there were a number of other towns of smaller size where they've also recommended that. But in terms of comparability, those 3 were eliminated in the cases where they were eliminated. In other cases, the personnel board has stayed the same. So there were 3 towns, Belmont, Holliston, and Hingham, that stayed the same. But we found that there were 7 towns, Brookline, Westwood, Needham, Amherst, Reading, Sharon, Westford, where the personnel board became advisory. So the overwhelming evidence is that the personnel boards are not staying the same as they were 60 years ago. They've become more advisory on human resource matters and really providing an assist on areas that currently are not in the personnel bylaw. If you look at the personnel bylaw, the existing bylaw, again, there's no reference really to the collective bargaining. There's no reference to diversity. There's no reference to affirmative action, and there's no reference to the setting of goals and providing advice on current human resource practices. We really think that that's a case where this bylaw change before you will actually increase the role of the personnel board in providing those duties, while at the same time making it an advisory board and not an operational board. So that's really the history of what we've done. We really, along the way, we did meet with the personnel board. We did meet with them in January of 2017 after that initial meeting with the chairman back in November of 2015. We had sent them the document of the changes at that time. We reviewed the changes with them. We listened to them that night. We made changes. We're not 100% in agreement. You'll hear that tonight. There's not 100% unanimity on this. But we did make changes, and we held off and did not bring it to the last town meeting because we didn't think it was ready, and we deferred it. In April, I met again with the chairman of the personnel board. Our whole committees met at the personnel board in June after sending him another revised document. We've continued to try to work together, but there are some philosophical differences that you'll hear about tonight. But we believe that an advisory board is the direction to go, and that's the recommendation before you tonight. And I'd urge your support of this recommendation. Thank you.
Does anyone wish to speak to this article? Mr. Reardon?
Mike Reardon, Precinct 2, Chair of the Personnel Board. Where'd Mr. Neely go? We agree, we disagree in principle. We certainly would agree that there are some updates necessary to the Personnel Board bylaw. Our fundamental disagreement is this. It's one of principle, which is this is a moderator-appointed committee. Therefore, it provides a basic check and balance to government. The strong town administrator legislation was intended to give the town administrator the authority that the Board of Selectmen had on a daily operational basis. Operationally, the assistant town administrator is doing the functional HR work. To get rid of the oversight, and if you read the article, it says, we'll still get all the information, we'll still look at it, but if we notice a problem, we can't do anything about it. Now, if everything were working fine, I would still have a problem with that. Just 2 weeks ago, we received something, and it wasn't correct. We had to send it back. That's a good collaborative approach. So essentially, we're being told, you're going to be an advisory board, but without any authority to notice anything or do anything. I think it's fundamentally bad government. We're appointed by the moderator. I don't think the intent in creating a strong town administrator was to take the authority away from the town moderator and therefore the legislative side of government. Process-wise, this went through, as Mr. Neely stated, all well and good. When it first went to the warrant committee, the original recommendation was to have it go back to the personnel board with conversation, go back for remanded for further study and to go back in conversation with the personnel board. We had that meeting on September 11th. The next time I heard about it was on Friday, October 13th, when I received an email at 4 o'clock saying that there were revisions to the amendments to the article and that they were going to be meeting with the warrant committee on Monday at 7 p.m. I don't understand the urgency to this. If you read the original recommendation, it was very thoughtful on the warrant committee's part. Hey, go back, we would all agree changes need to happen, but let's do it in a more thoughtful, collaborative way and address those things. So on principle, I don't think it's a great idea. On process, I don't think it's a great idea, and I don't think it serves the original intent and conversation, and I don't understand the urgency. I don't see what is being resolved here. So we have a principle disagreement.
Mr. Walker? Oh, you're not wishing to speak. I'm sorry.
Good evening, Leroy Walker, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 10, and member of the Town Government Study Committee. Just a little bit on the principled disagreement that we have and the question of urgency. As Chairman Neely outlined, this has been a discussion that has been going on for some time. We met with the Personnel Board several times, and when we met with the Warrant Committee, they gave us some excellent feedback, both with regard to the technical nature of the document, that is, how readable or accessible it was, and also some questions about the substantive changes that we said needed to be made. This is a discussion that we've had with the Personnel Board, as you've heard, over the last year, and we have agreed to disagree. So we did try our best to keep them informed. At no point did they say, okay, well, we can live with this or we can live with that. Essentially, since the beginning, they've said, we disagree about the changes to our role. But let's talk a little bit about legislative versus executive. As Mr. Neely has outlined, the town meeting has made several decisions that are critical for the future of the town. The first was to create the strong town administrator role. In creating that role, the acknowledgement was that we should create a role that had hiring and firing authority. Second, just recently, town meeting decided to increase the number of selectmen from 3 to 5. Again, expanding the scope of the executive authority. The legislative body of the town is you. Yes, there are several appointed committees that provide you with information and have a role, but in this case, the role of the Personnel Board needs to change. And the reason is that it was created to solve a problem that no longer exists. That problem was that we had a large number of non-union employees. We didn't have as many bargaining units as we do now, 50 years ago. And the commitment that the town made was to create a body that should oversee both the benefits discussions and the terms and conditions of employment for those individuals. That was over 100 individuals 50 years ago. It's now 12. The second point, and the most important point, is that at that time, the town government was very different, and the Personnel Board had the role of overseeing every single hire and passing judgment on every single hire, not reviewing a range of candidates, reviewing the paperwork for a single individual and saying yes or no. That is a structure that is woefully outdated. The reason is that we now have a strong town administrator who has the authority to hire and fire. We'll have 5 selectmen, both of whom have the ultimate executive authority. The question is, do we still need a personnel board that needs to look at every single hire? I think if you talked with department heads, they would say emphatically no. But what we tried to do is to maximize, and as an HR professional myself, maximize the benefit and value that the Personnel Board can bring. And that's in an advisory capacity, advising on trends. We inserted the responsibility about collective bargaining planning. That's an area where I think they can play an important role. We inserted the responsibility about making sure that they provide advice and oversight in the areas of diversity and equal employment. And there are a range of areas where good HR expertise can be brought to bear. But it was our very strong feeling and that of the warrant committee who supported this, and that of the selectmen who support this, and that of the new town administrator who support this, that the best structure for the town going forward is one in which we let the executive branch do the job that we've either elected or appointed them to do, and provide good oversight and advice, just as some other committees like the audit committee do. So I would urge you to support this recommendation. Thanks.
Mr. Burns?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. David Burns, Precinct 2, Chairman of the Board of Selectmen. We met extensively with the Town Government Study Committee, and that committee is comprised of several former selectmen, a lot of experience, school committee chair, warrant chair, and they did due diligence on this. You, the town meeting member voters, you voted to go to a strong form of government, which was great, and we appreciate that. This is about efficiencies, and for us to be effective, we need to stay with the times. This isn't just a quick, jolt thinking, let's do this now. This is about moving our government forward, and I think that, the town meeting has been very responsive to that, and I think our town administrator was hired to make decisions, and I think the Personnel Board has an incredible amount of value still in this role. It could be on job classifications. It could be on many different types of things, drawing up, certain types of, whether or not it be information on new jobs. But it's really about efficiencies. And I think that it's important for us to recognize that we need to keep moving this forward. By sitting on it, it's going to slow us down. So I want to let you know that, we did vote unanimously as a board. We feel very strongly about this, and we feel that the Town Government Study Committee did a thorough job in recommending this article. So I urge you to vote yes. Thank you.
Mr. Schroed?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Frank Schroed, Precinct 2. This is my first time suggesting an amendment. I suspect that listening to Mr. Walker and Selectman Burns, this might be a friendly amendment. Should I just walk through it and then? Okay, so fellow town meeting members, selectmen, warrant committee, I also prefer writing to speaking, so bear with me. I rise to amend the proposed article as follows. Section 3B, delete paragraph 4, which reads, the Personnel Board shall approve the creation of new employment positions in town departments and advise the warrant committee on the same. Section 7A, delete this part in its entirety, which consists of the following single sentence. The total number of persons employed by the town, temporarily or otherwise, shall not be increased without the approval of the Personnel Board. The primary reason for proposing this amendment is that, in my opinion, an appointed board should not have decision-making authority over an elected board. Department heads from time to time will make a case for personnel resources. These requests have a rationale that is reviewed by the respective board or, in the case of the police, fire, etc., the strong town administrator. If they agree with the request, that will be folded into their budget presentation and they will go and take their chances before the warrant committee, which is no small hurdle. Requiring a director to appear before the Personnel Board adds an unnecessary bureaucratic burden, adds little value to the process as currently defined, and does not provide a check and balance as much as it does give that committee a veto. I realize this requirement existed prior to this rewrite of the bylaw, but this represents an opportunity to put the authority for new hires where it logically belongs, with the strong town administrator and the directors and boards elected to govern our institutions, cemetery, library, and parks. I should note that in the introduction that accompanied the revised article, under changed duties, the last bullet reads, Personnel Board would no longer approve each individual appointment or promotion, but would review and audit trends on a regular monthly basis. I do not believe the language of the article is aligned with the introductory statement, therefore I propose this amendment. I thank both the Town Government Study Committee and the Personnel Board for their attention to this article and their service to the town.
Mr. Schroeth, were you recommending that as requesting that as a friendly amendment? Or,
Yes. If it's not accepted, I would like it to go to a vote.
yeah, in that case, we need to consult with the Town Government Study Committee. Mr. Burns?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. David Burns, Precinct 2, Chairman of the Board of Selectmen. We do believe it is within scope, and both the Town Government Study and the Board of Selectmen are agreeable to that friendly amendment.
And Warrant Committee? Right. So while the Warrant Committee is voting, let me remind the audience what Mr. Schroeth proposed as a friendly amendment, which the Town Government Study Committee and the Selectmen have accepted, which is why it didn't need a second. So in effect, they appealed directly to them. So if you go to page, let me get this right. Page 6 of your handout. Pardon me, let me start with, page 2 of your handout. You'll see section 3 at the top, subsection B that says authority of the Personnel Board. If you go down to the bottom, the third paragraph from the bottom is recommending to be deleted. That's where it says the Personnel Board shall approve the creation of new employment positions. Ms. Mark, can you put this section up? Can you put up page 2? Okay. Apologize, Mr. Morash. We have technical difficulties, so please sing along with me in your hymnal. So if that's clear on page 2, we're going to remove the third paragraph from the bottom at page 2. Second, flip to page 6 of your handout. Go to section 7 in the middle, subsection A. The motion is to remove paragraph A in its entirety. So page 2. Excellent point. So we have a question. Pardon me a sec. So clarification, we'll need the motion to include the reordering of the subsections in section 3 and 7 to be renumbered alphabetically with the removal of those two subsections. Folks, we'll have a quick report from the chair of the warrant committee on their recommendation, acceptance or rejection of the amendment.
Mr. Moderator, the warrant committee does not accept the amendment.
So folks, now what we have before you then is an amendment that I haven't heard a second for yet. Now seconded. So at this point, yes, I'll get to you, sir. Just explaining to the group, what's before us now is the original document with an amendment to delete those two paragraphs that has been put before the body and seconded. We're now going to debate that amendment, not the overall article. Is that clear to everyone? So we're just debating the deletion of those two paragraphs and the alphabetic renumbering of the others in those sections. Does anyone wish to speak to the amendment? Yes, sir. Can we have the mic on?
Frank Giuliano, Precinct 3. I'm a little confused, so you have to help me out. If we eliminate the paragraph that says the personal board shall approve the creation of new employment positions in the town department and advise the warrant committee on the same, that's one of the paragraphs I guess you're going to take out.
Again,
page
yes.
2. And then the other paragraph you want to eliminate is section 7A, where in fact it says the personnel board is not involved with a number of employees. So who will decide if we're going to have a new position? Is that the town administrator? If a new position comes up, the town administrator alone, without any oversight, will determine? That's the question I have, so help me out, would you?
Mr. Burns, you have a possible answer to that? Yes, Mr. Neely. Do you have an answer to that?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Rick Neely, Town Meeting Member Precinct 3. The effect of that would be for the warrant committee to approve the creation of new positions as part of the budget process and in effect determine the total number of employees. The warrant committee, as part of its budget deliberations, would be approving the creation of new positions and the funding of those positions, as that would be the effect of this amendment.
Does anyone else, Mr. Morash? I'm sorry, Mr. Neely, you're still answering?
After the warrant committee makes its recommendation, the town meeting ultimately would make the decision.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Neely. Mr. Morash?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Steve Morash, Precinct 2. Totally confused. I don't understand it, Mr. Moderator. We had a friendly amendment by my friend Frank that was accepted by, I believe, the Government Town Study Committee and the Board of Selectmen. Is that not, so now if I understand this, the warrant committee that has supported this previously is now telling us they do not support this amendment at all?
That's correct. They don't support the amendment.
I don't think they have a say on the amendment.
No, what they're saying is because they don't accept the friendly.
But I don't, Mr. Moderator, point of order then. Does the warrant committee have the right to accept or reject a friendly amendment by the committee?
You know, I will double check and make sure I'm right. Please stand by.
Thank you, sir.
That's the question before the body that we got. So if they don't agree, then that is not.
I might even speak to that before I do my next conversation. At least more than you can speak.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have an answer. I conferred with the town council and 14 years of Milton town moderator, and here's the process that we've all agreed on. That for a friendly amendment to be accepted as a friendly, then one of you proposes it as a friendly, the sponsoring bodies, which is the Town Government Study Committee and the Selectmen, both have to agree to accept it as a friendly. And then they agree that the Warrant Committee has to accept it as a friendly. If they do, there's no vote on the amendment required by the body. And then we proceed with the rest of the discussion. However, since the Warrant Committee said no, they do not accept it as a friendly, then it cannot be a friendly amendment, and now it reverts to you as a body to decide to vote on just the amendment or not. Does that make sense? That's where we are right now. Is that clear, Mr. Morash?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My question then would be, could we have an explanation from the Warrant Committee as to why they do not accept this as a friendly amendment? Thank you, sir.
Absolutely.
The consensus of the Warrant Committee.
Excuse me,
ladies and
Mr.
gentlemen.
Escher, could you introduce yourself and
I'm George Asher. I'm chairman of the Warrant Committee. The consensus of the committee was the change being proposed is substantial, and without further time to deliberate, we did not feel comfortable as a committee approving it on your behalf. It's your decision ultimately, but with the magnitude of the change that it does engender for the amendment as it's been presented, the revised information that you all received in the mail, we did not feel comfortable approving it by majority.
Thank you. Mr. Walker, I think you were next.
Just a little more context as to Leroy Walker, Precinct 10 Town Meeting Member. Let me try it again. Leroy Walker, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 10, member of the Town Government Study Committee. A little more context on why the Town Government Study Committee and the Selectmen felt that this friendly amendment should be accepted, and a little surprised that the Warrant Committee decided not to support it for the following reason, that if you look at section 4, last paragraph in that section on page 4, under administration of the Town Administrator Authority section, I alluded earlier to the excellent feedback that we got from the Warrant Committee. One of the most substantive changes that the Warrant Committee asked us to make was with regard to the question of whether, with the structure that we were proposing, whether the town administrator could in fact overrule an elected or appointed board. They felt very strongly that the town administrator should not be able to do that. Thus, we inserted the language, which is the last sentence, that says, in instances where an appointment is recommended to the town administrator by an elected or appointed town board, commission, or committee, such appointment recommendation will only be altered, returned for further consideration, or denied where the town administrator determines that a town personnel policy or practice has not been followed.
Mr. Walker, could you point to page and chapter, paragraph you're reading from?
Section 4, last paragraph on page 4.
Page 4.
Last
Section
sentence,
4.
which begins with, in instances where an appointment is recommended. So, the gist of that was to ensure that the town administrator could not overrule an elected or appointed board. These two amendments are entirely within the spirit of that same objective. So I'm a little surprised that the Warrant Committee, who urged us to insert language clarifying that in this case, doesn't support the amendment, but I would urge you to all vote in support of the amendment. Thank you.
Mr. Reardon?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mike Reardon, Precinct 2, Chair of the Personnel Board. Two quick things. I just want clarification, if I understood that the Warrant Committee would actually make the decision about a new position? Is that correct? So my question would be, who would approve the position? That was I think the question was that. And
So
then
your
town
question
meeting-
is not a funding question, but approving the creation of the position?
Correct. So I'm just unclear on who would actually approve the creation of the position.
Mr. Neely, do you have that answer?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Rick Neely, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 3, Chairman of the Town Government Study Committee. The process that would be followed should the amendment be adopted would be that the Warrant Committee would have to fund the creation of a position submitted by a non-school department. If the Warrant Committee funded a position that was requested by a department, the Personnel Board would have to approve the classification in the job description for that position, so that the Personnel Board would still have a role in determining whether the position should be a level 5 or level 6, and in fact, how it fits into the structure of the overall positions. So there still is a role. It just is in this initial stages of the process preparing the budget. So right now there is a stage in the budget process where the Personnel Board participates, and this amendment would eliminate that particular phase.
Mr. Reardon, is this a follow-up question to that?
It's in response to that as a, because now I can make my point because I just wasn't understanding the process.
I see. Okay.
It wasn't clear to me. So in doing so, what's happening is the Personnel Board the money will be voted on for a position, whether the need has been determined or not, and then after the money is determined, the Personnel Board would then look at it. It seems a little backwards to me. The other piece is there are very functional things. Twice this year, in the last fiscal year, 2 positions came before us. One was an elected body. They asked for a new position. We asked, would you structure your organization this way? They said no, but the 2 people in the position aren't doing what they should be doing. We denied that position. One of our roles is that town government is a small business. People work really closely together. It's hard to say no sometimes, and it's easy to kick the can down the road. So that's one reason that I oppose this friendly amendment.
Does anyone else wish to speak to this motion to amend? All right, Mr. Mullen.
Peter Mullen, Precinct 2. Half of the town government is not covered by this bylaw. The entire school department is exempt from the bylaw. If there's going to be a new position in the school department, the school committee recommends it as part of their budget. It gets reviewed by the warrant committee, and it ultimately gets voted by the town meeting. What this amendment would do is apply that concept town-wide. Really, the central question to this whole dispute between the Personnel Board and the recommendation that's before the body is who should have final authority with regard to approving a position. Right now, as the bylaw exists, the final authority to approve a position is with the Personnel Board. Normally what they do is after a department or an elected board has decided who they want to hire for an opening or a new position, they send that name and the person's resume to the Personnel Board. It drags out the process of hiring somebody, usually to the order of magnitude of 30 days. The Personnel Board doesn't see the other candidates who have applied for the job. They're not making a decision about who's the best person. At most, they're saying the process that was followed seems to be appropriate and this person seems to have the qualifications for this job. In the name of efficiency, the thought is that the town administrator should be able to supervise the hiring of staff within the town. If there's problems, the information is going to go to the Personnel Board. The Personnel Board can take it up with the town administrator, and if unsatisfied with that, they're obligated under this proposed bylaw to report any issues that they have to the town meeting. It's a question of efficiency. We need to adopt this. I urge a yes vote.
Ms. Hodlin? Just a sec, need a mic?
Hello, can you hear? Christine Hodlin, Precinct 2, Town Meeting Member, and I'm a trustee of the Board of the Library. I am rising in support of this amendment. The Library Director and the Board of Trustees for the library are the most qualified people to determine what positions are needed by the library. In the past, we have presented those positions and have to wait until there is a Personnel Board meeting to present to them our positions. In several cases, they have been refused. In several, they have been approved. And I don't quite understand how the Personnel Board would have any more information on who or how the library should be run than the director and the trustees after they've approved and reviewed that. So I urge you to please support this amendment. Thank you.
Does anyone else wish to speak to this amendment? Okay, I'll just remind everyone where we are. So before the body, we have a motion to remove on page 2, Section 3, subsection B, the third paragraph from the bottom of page 2, that says the Personnel Board shall approve the creation of new employment positions in town departments and advise the warrant committee on the same. There's no reordering required in that subsection B. Second, the motion is to turn to page 6, subsection 7, that's labeled miscellaneous general provisions. The motion is to remove the first paragraph A. The total number of persons employed by the town temporarily or otherwise shall not be increased without the approval of the Personnel Board, and to renumber the remaining paragraphs in section 7 alphabetically. This requires a simple majority. All those in favor of the motion to amend, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. The motion carries. Now, you now have before you an amended article here. Does anyone wish to speak to now the approval of this article? I think, yes, ma'am. If you wish to speak, just please start working your way down and I'll recognize you down at the front.
Vicki McCarthy, Precinct 8, Town Meeting Member. I'm just curious if there's a revised recommendation from the Warrant Committee on the article, because I just received the revisions in the mail today and I don't see any recommendation.
Okay, I should remind the audience. So when a body comes to the Warrant Committee after the article, the warrant is published, but before we come to town meeting, and the warrant committee accepts the new language, that becomes the recommendation to approve the new language that comes before this body. So the fact that the warrant committee approved what you have in your handout, now subject to those two amendments, a week ago Monday, would that be 16th? That becomes their recommendation to you to approve the handout. Any other questions? I know it's confusing. Yes, Mr. Frizzetti.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Steve Frizzetti, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 7, and member of the Board of Cemetery Trustees. I was just curious if we could get the warrant committee's recommendation as far as the article now that it's been amended.
We will. Yes, that's the last step. Is I asked the warrant committee, are they now in favor of this article as recommended? That's always the last step before we go to a vote. Does anyone else want to speak? I don't see anyone rising. Okay. Do you have a sense of the warrant committee, Mr. Asher?
George Asher, Chair of the Warrant Committee. The Warrant Committee met with as many interested parties as wanted to come on 2 occasions. The history of this amendment is that we revised our recommendation following our October 16th meeting based upon the information that was provided. Mr. Neely came, and the Warrant Committee voted to accept and to recommend the revision that you have in your hand as revised. So the recommendation of the Warrant Committee is to accept the most recent Article 2 that you have. As amended. You've amended it, so yes.
Yes. So the warrant committee approves the recommendation as amended. With that, this requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor of the recommendation as amended, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The motion passes. Now, on to Article 3, which is in page 18. Recommended that the town vote to amend the general bylaws by adding the following, Chapter 26. No person or entity excluding the residents of residential premises on projects not requiring a building permit on their lot and excluding the town shall operate any mechanized vehicles, including without limitation trucks, backhoes, bobcats, and earth movers, or operate other mechanized equipment, including without limitation power saws, other power tools, power washers, chainsaws, generators, lawn mowers, lawn sweepers, and leaf blowers with respect to construction or maintenance activities on any lot in the town except as may be permitted by a construction management plan approved by the planning board or building commissioner, or in the absence of an approved construction management plan, except between the hours of 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. and 5 p.m. on Saturdays, and 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. on Sundays, and on legal holidays when the New York Stock Exchange is closed, provided that the building commissioner, police chief, fire chief, director of public works, or their designees may permit such construction or maintenance activity outside of such hours in the event of emergency or other good cause, and further provided that construction activities on the interior of a fully enclosed building may be conducted outside of these hours, and further provided that snow plowing and snow and ice removal may be conducted outside of these hours. The building commissioner is authorized to enforce the provisions of this section. Any person or entity who violates any provision of this section shall be subject to a stop work order. A violation shall receive a warning for the first offense and shall be liable for a fine of $100 for each subsequent offense. Mr. Burns, I think you wanted to speak to this article.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. David Burns, Precinct 2, Town Meeting Member, Chairman of the Board of Selectmen. So this article, it stemmed from the number of complaints that we'd received town-wide, whereas, whether it be construction companies or contractors, were doing work at odd times, which were inconveniencing you as a taxpayer in your neighborhoods. Basically, this doesn't limit the homeowner at all in doing any yard work at any point in time. It's a good neighbor policy, and I think that this is something that is much needed. It's something that we support. I think that by limiting these contractors to doing work under certain times will increase the quality of life for all of you as residents. Thank you.
Does anyone else wish to speak to this article? This requires a simple majority. Ms. Agostino, do you wish to speak? Yes, you do. I think it's dead.
Diane DiTullio Agostino, Precinct 9, and Chair of the Commission on Disability. Just prior to making the comments regarding this article, I'd like to make a note that the Commission is in desperate need of some additional assistance and that you don't even need to attend our meetings. The last meeting, several of the members couldn't physically get there, but their input was received by a conference call at the table. So please keep that in mind if you know anyone willing to help, just to give any commissioner a call and we'll let you know what we do to help everyone else. I'm so thrilled that the Board of Selectmen followed through with this. The Commission has heard from so many people about noise in this town. We've learned even about new disabilities that some of our residents have, and we're trying very hard to reach out to people who might feel isolated by their disability. And in one case, we heard about an individual who is so disabled by noise that is rarely able to leave the home. So I thank the Board of the Board of Selectmen, and know that this article will certainly improve the quality of life of everyone, but especially those with hearing loss or sensitivity to sound. So thank you very much.
Yes, Ms. Sheridan?
Thank you, Linda Lee Sheridan, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 9. I want to thank you also for this article, but I do have a question around the Saturday morning time. So I appreciate the 7 to 7 Monday through Friday, but wonder what the thinking was behind the 7 a.m. start time on Saturday mornings. So if someone could just speak to the reasoning behind that. Personally, I'm not going to make an amendment, but it just seems like an 8 o'clock start time would be more reasonable on a Saturday. Thank you.
Mr. Whiteside.
Alexander Whiteside, Chairman of the Planning Board, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 9. The thinking was that Saturday is a business day, and a lot of people currently start work at 7 a.m., and pushing it up to 8 is probably not entirely reasonable. So that was our thinking.
Anyone else wish to speak to this article?
Karen Friedman Hanna, Precinct 2. I have a question about the idea of it being the days that are the legal holidays when the New York Stock Exchange is closed. I know, first off, this is a little self-serving question. My husband is now a small-scale contractor, and frequently, I know already, people who work who don't want to take a day off to have to be there when their home is being worked on, if they need something done, frequently they request of him to come on a holiday because they're off from work and they want to know that work can get done. So the idea that this is automatically excluding those days, I think, is a very significant potential problem for contractors and for homeowners who want to have work done when they don't have to be at work. So I would request that we consider modifying that portion to taking out the legal holidays, because very often those are on Mondays. That's a work day for contractors, for various things. I don't know. I think that one is stretching it a bit, but I would ask the board to consider that modifying this to not include the legal holidays. I could see early morning being a problem for people and late at night being a problem for people, but on regular workday holidays if they fall within the work week. I think that that's asking a lot.
So since it doesn't sound like you want to make a specific motion, you're trying to ask the planning board a question to see how they could accommodate your...
Well, that would be my first step to see if it can be accommodated, and if it can't, then I would like to make an amendment to take that portion out. So I guess that's a question of whether it,
Okay.
how this can be approached.
Well, we start with a question before we get to a motion. How about that?
Okay.
Mr. Whiteside?
But we did recognize that there are many holidays where people work, but legal holidays when the stock exchange is closed, there are not that many of them. Christmas, New Year's Day, they're pretty big holidays that are involved here. Most of the holidays, the stock exchange grinds along. That was our thinking. People who are at home deserve some protection against noise on those days.
Do we know specifically, besides Christmas and New Year's and Thanksgiving, what the legal holidays are? I'm curious. I don't know offhand for...
Why don't we try to get that follow-up question answered?
Because if it's only those few, I'm fine with this, but I thought that the stock exchange was closed on some additional days.
I think we're looking up that answer. Does someone have that answer? Yes.
Ellen Denoyer, Precinct 2.
Speak up, please, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. Ellen Denoyer, Precinct 2. At least in 2017, the stock market was also closed on Good Friday, to your point. I believe it also often closes in the afternoon, the day before the 4th of July. So I think I'm in favor of the article in general, but I don't think the list of the stock market closures is the right list of holidays to use.
Sorry, Mr. Whiteside, we can't hear you. So, ma'am, Ms. Denoyer, are you finished with your comments before Mr. Whiteside stands up?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. We're going to list the... Do you have an answer here, Mr.
Good
Whiteside?
Friday may be it may be closed, but it's not a holiday, so it wouldn't apply to Good Friday. We've got New Year's Day, Martin Luther King Day, Washington's birthday, Memorial Day, Independence Day, Labor Day, Thanksgiving Day, and Christmas. But
Did that answer our question on the legal holidays?
But I suppose the day before Independence Day also is not a legal holiday, although Independence Day is.
So, Ms. Hanna, this is now your...
I'm satisfied with the way that it is. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Mahalchik, I think you're next.
Mike Mahalchik, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 7. I'm trying to keep things quiet. I'm a huge fan of peace and quiet. And there's a precedent in East Milton, I believe, that the fruit center doesn't take deliveries in trucks before 8 o'clock in the morning on Saturday. So I was wondering if the planning board would consider a friendly amendment to change that from 7 a.m. to 8 o'clock, as suggested earlier by Linda Lee Sheridan. I think it's pretty reasonable. And there's precedent.
All right, we have a request for a friendly amendment that does not require a second. It's spoken directly to the planning board. We'll see what they say.
That would be fine. 8 o'clock on Saturdays.
And just briefly, I'll check in with the warrant committee. Mr. Burns, like to fill the gap?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. This is actually our article, and, so that's why I think it's incumbent that I speak about it.
I apologize.
And I appreciate the concern, the 8 o'clock. I mean, look at, we hear it as much, if not more than anyone else, about the concern with the noise. And But we also have to recognize that we have businesses like landscapers, several in town, that depend upon that on Saturdays. It's part of their work week. And, and often they're doing a lot of catch-up due to weather. And I think to take that time frame away from them, we have to think of these businesses. We don't have many businesses in town, and I think we need to support them. So, I think that we're making strides here, by limiting contractors during certain times and having a good neighbor policy by being able to still do work on your own houses. But it's our opinion that we should still keep it at 7 o'clock to support the local businesses.
So the Board of Selectmen, Mr. Burns, I stand corrected, by the way, you were the submitting authority. You reject the friendly amendment?
That's correct, Mr. Moderator.
You do, okay. So now, Mr. Mahalchik, there's a motion before the body. Is there a second? Would anyone like to speak to the motion to amend? Let's get the language right. So we're on page 18 of your warrant. And I know we can't edit this live, but I'm going down to the bottom third where you see on the right-hand side of the paragraph it says 7 a.m. and 5 p.m. on Saturdays. If I understand, Mr. Mahalchik, you want that to be 8 a.m. instead of 7 a.m. Is that correct? Correct. Everyone understand that? Anyone wish to speak to the motion to amend? All those in favor of the motion to amend, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, no? No. The motion fails. So we're now back to the article as unamended, as written. Anyone wish to speak to this Article 3? It requires a simple majority. All those in favor of the recommendation of the Warrant Committee, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no? No. The motion carries. We're now on to Article 4. Since time is moving on, this is somewhat technical and lengthy. I'll entertain a motion to waive the reading of this article. Second it. All in favor of waiving the reading, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no? Motion carries. We will waive the reading. I'd like to recognize Steve O'Donnell, who is the chairman of the Historical Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Steve O'Donnell, Chair of the Historical Commission. Chapter 22 of the General Bylaws was passed by town meeting 10 years ago. It is officially entitled Demolition of Historically Significant Buildings. It is commonly known as the Demo Delay Bylaw. Our effort here with this article is to update that bylaw and to create a situation where we don't have to come back to town meeting frequently to update it. So this article involves 3 specific points. However, in talking to people, as members of the commission talk to people, there doesn't seem to be a clear understanding of what the bylaw does now. So I'd like to take a couple of minutes and just explain what it does and then how what we're proposing would change it. The bylaw doesn't prevent anybody from doing anything or force somebody to do something that they don't want to do. What the bylaw does, excuse me, it instructs the building commissioner to forward to the Historical Commission a demolition application on a covered building. Covered buildings currently are those built 1919 or before. When the demolition application is forwarded to the commission, they review it, make a determination of whether or not the building is historically significant or not. If it's found to be not historically significant, the demolition could go on the next day, as soon as they get their permit. If the building is found to be historically significant and the applicant wishes to pursue demolition, they file the demolition plan with the committee, with the commission. The commission then schedules a public hearing, giving the public, neighbors, anybody else in town an opportunity to weigh in on whether or not they think the property ought to be preserved or not. If the commission finds the property not preferably preserved, the demolition can go forward. If the commission finds it to be preferably preserved, there would be a 9-month period of demolition delay inserted, period during which the building commissioner can't issue a demolition permit, but a period of time that allows interested parties to come together and figure out an alternative to demolition, be it preservation, restoration, reworking of a development plan to include the historic building, or perhaps even have the building relocated. This takes a lot of energy and time, and the current 9-month demolition delay period simply isn't long enough. Now, we've asked for 3 specific changes. The first change would be to update what I call the trigger year, the year before which demolition applications have to be submitted to the commission, and we're proposing a new date of 75 years before the application. So rather than a specific year, it would be a moving year going forward, automatically covering more buildings as time went on. Newton, by the way, has a 50-year threshold. Brookline has no threshold at all. Every building in town can be subject to their delay bylaw. We're proposing 75 years. Second item is really a housekeeping item. We're asking for 8 copies of the demolition plan rather than 4, simply because there are 7 members of the commission and the planning office needs one. That's really just housekeeping. The third item is the demolition delay period. We're proposing a delay period of 24 months. As I outlined before, the whole purpose of the demolition delay period is to give parties time to come together and find an alternative to demolition. We looked at a lot of other cities and towns who are experiencing the same kinds of problems that we have in Milton. Same kinds of problems in terms of demolition and redevelopment. Excuse me. Whether it's reworking a development plan or finding a new buyer and financing to restore the property, or finding a buyer who can relocate the property, relocate the building to a different property, all of this takes time to put together. The flip side of the demolition delay period is that sometimes an owner will say, that's fine, I'm just going to sit and wait it out. Makes no effort whatsoever. We can do nothing. Other towns, which have Community Preservation Act funds, can be a partner in trying to preserve property. Of course, we don't have that option in Milton. Preservation of private property is strictly a private enterprise. What the commission is really trying to do is to encourage. We can't require, we can't prevent demolition. We're trying to encourage preservation. A longer demolition delay period not only gives more of an opportunity to raise funds and find buyers in other locations and so forth, but it also discourages just sitting by and waiting for it to happen.
Mr. O'Donnell, 4 minutes left.
When historic buildings are gone, they're gone. They can't be replaced. Every loss of a historic building impacts the town. Every loss of a historic building decreases some of that which makes the town a desirable place in which to live. We earnestly request your support for this article. Thank you.
Mr. Fundling, did you want to speak to this article?
Hello, I'm Jay Funling, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 3. So I read this article, and the first thing that leapt out to me was the cutoff change for the buildings. I immediately saw, as Mr. O'Donnell just pointed out, and also I'd like to thank Mr. O'Donnell. He very patiently answered way too many of my questions in this past week, so thank you very much. When I read it, it leapt out to me that the cutoff for buildings is being moved from 1920 to 75 years in the past. So when I read that, my first question was, what's 2018 minus 75? Okay, I see a lot of hands out there. Okay, it's 1943 is the answer. So we're moving the cutoff year from 1920 to 1943, which will then move forward 1 year at a time. My next question was, how many houses are currently covered under this bylaw, and how many houses will be covered if we approve this? And fortunately, the town assessor makes information like that publicly available. So I looked at all the construction dates for single-family houses in Milton, and I made this graph. There we go. What I learned was that 12% of houses in town were built before 1900, and then we have the houses in red on the graph that were built between 1900 and 1920. So a total of 19% of single-family houses are currently covered by this bylaw. Now, after 1920, there was a real construction boom in the 20s and 30s, as you can see. By the time we get to the construction drop-off during World War II, we have 58% of current Milton houses were built before 1944. So if we approve this, we'll go from covering 19% of houses to 58% of houses. And then, of course, as you can see, after World War II, we have the construction boom in the 1950s. And if we approve this bylaw, it will go forward 1 year at a time. And in the next 15 or so years, we'll cover that 1950s construction boom. I'm not saying if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but I got this information and wanted to share it with town meeting to make sure we all know what we're voting on. Last slide I won't speak to very often because Mr. O'Donnell did a good job of summarizing the process, but still in the vein of let's make sure we know what we're voting on. The process for determining if it's historically significant can take up to 52 days according to the bylaw. Process for determining if it's preferably preserved, the owner has 2 months to prepare their case and the board has 2 months to do their work, so that's 4 months if everybody takes their full time. So again, just in the interest of knowing what we're voting on, it could be almost a 2.5-year process. I haven't decided how I'm voting on this article, but I wanted to make sure we all knew what we were voting on.
Thank you. Mr. Morash?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Steve Morash, Precinct 2, Town Meeting Member. I might be mistaken, but this is an old city, or an old town, rather. I think it came around the 1600s, not long after Boston. Do we really not know what historic buildings are in town? Well, we should, because we're not building any more historic buildings, I don't believe. And if we do, they should be covered by the first, number one, a building listed on the National Register of Historic Places or the State Register, all which has been found eligible for listing in the National Register. Period. It then says or. This means that my house, built in 1930, now falls in this category. And if for some reason I wanted to do something to my house to take part of it down, I now have to wait 2 years probably for this town to overreach this, to get into my house, my personal property. And I guarantee you, I know the people I bought the house from. And while I may think some very nice things happened in that, I guarantee you nothing historical has happened in this house. And I would think a lot of those other things are there too. So I would like to make a motion, Mr. Moderator, to strike small number 2 and not go back to 75 years. I think the great job that the Milton Historical Society does in this town should be enough to identify and help us all get our support to save those historical buildings in town. I grew up in Boston. I know a lot of historical buildings. We can say there are new architectures that are coming along, new architectural gems, and when they come online, we should make that a historical building and save it. I've listened to this for years in this town about the travesty to this town that was done, the horror that was done by tearing down the old city hall, old town hall. We all agree on that. But where would we be with the new schools that we now sit in if we had not stopped those historic 1975 buildings? 75-year-old buildings. So I asked for that amendment. I make that amendment to strike small number 2 in section A. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Is there a second? So everyone understands, we're on page 20 in the dark black text. So where it says section A, below that subsection 2, the motion is to strike that sentence. This reads, any building which in whole or in part was built more than and including 75 years prior. Anyone wish to speak to this motion to amend? I'm sorry. Yes, Mr. O'Donnell.
A couple of points of clarification, if I may. Town buildings are specifically excluded from this bylaw. Partial demolition is specifically excluded from this bylaw. As I said in the beginning, this bylaw doesn't force anybody to do anything or prevent them from doing anything. What 75 years does is gives the Historical Commission an opportunity to review a demolition application. There was a fair amount of feeling in town when the Milton Women's Club building was demolished on Reedsdale Road. No one had any say in that whatsoever, because that was built after 1919. Now, I don't know whether other buildings have come down that would fall within that 75-year period, because the commission isn't notified. An application is filed, it's gone. I would strongly urge, again, partial demolitions are not included, town buildings are not included. I would urge you to reject the amendment. Thank you.
Yes, sir, in front.
Hi, Terry McNeil, Precinct 3. Moving to Precinct 2 soon, so I'll probably be booted off for a while here until I run again. I just want to talk about the opportunity to review that Mr. O'Donnell just touched upon, because the opportunity to review, which we're now subjecting not 20% of the homes in town, but 60%, close to 60% of those homes to, is the opportunity for the board, who does a fine job, to determine whether a building is historically significant. What does that mean? So the definition of historically significant building is any building which is A, importantly associated with one or more historic persons or events, or with the architectural, cultural, political, economic, or social history of the town of Milton, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, or the United States of America. Or B, is historically or architecturally important by reason of period, style, method of building construction, or association with a particular architect or builder, either by itself or in the context of a group of buildings. Now, God bless the Historical Commission for dealing with this definition, but it means all of the homes we've talked about are now subject to a very subjective standard. We have now tripled the number of homes in Milton that are subject to it, and I fully support and love the character of this town because there's historic homes and buildings here that give it the character that we have. But I don't think, without a showing of why this 23, 24, and rolling period is historically significant, we should subject the homes in this town in that period to this 2-year waiting period, which I fully support for historic buildings, but I don't support for any building that the commission happens to believe may be historic based on a definition which is hard to refute. And I think before we make it more difficult to do construction in this town, I don't think it's going to create affordability, particularly if the towns cited for this are Brookline and Newton. They're not known for being the most affordable towns. So I think we need to think about ways to tackle this issue, and one of them already exists, and it's the zoning that goes in place when you demolish a building. It doesn't mean because you demolished a building you get to put up something brand new and hideous and ugly. And by the way, that process to rebuild something will inevitably, if it doesn't conform to zoning, require a public hearing and neighbors can weigh in. So I think while I fully support the idea of giving them the 2-year period they need for buildings that are actually historic, I think subjecting 3 times the numbers of homes in a town that's already expensive and already difficult to rehab and develop for people who are flocking here to move here is really not the best move for us. And so I support this amendment because it tackles that one specific issue, which is putting 3 times as many homes in this bucket while protecting everything else the board is doing and needs the right to do. So I support the amendment by Mr. Morash. Thank you.
Ms. Minkarski? Yes.
Good evening. Joan Gankarski, Precinct 1. My home was built before the Civil War in the 1850s, although I have not lived in the home that long. Since my home has been in this category prior to tonight's amendment, and I'm a numbers person, I would like to ask Mr. O'Donnell, as well as the Historical Commission, if you can give me a certain time frame, let's say the last 10 years, and how many homes have actually been discussed and a question with regard to their demolition has been presented. Give us a real world example of what we are speaking of. I would truly appreciate that. Thank you.
In the last 7 years, fiscal 2011 through 2017, the Historical Commission received referrals of 21 demolition applications. Of those 21, 11 were found not historically significant. Of the remaining 10, 4 were found not preferably preserved. 4 were found after public hearing preferably preserved. 2 owners took no further action. So over this last 7 years, we had 21 referrals. There were 4 buildings preferably preserved. 2 have come down, 1 awaits the wrecking ball. The 4th still stands for now.
Thank you. Mr. Chinman, I think you were next.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Michael Chibin, Precinct 2. Mr. Moderator, could I ask if anyone has a laser pointer that would make my point much clearer? If not, I'll try without it. Mr. Moderator, I believe that what we're actually voting on and what Mr. Morash addressed is this amendment proposed here in section 3.A little 2, whatever, by deleting the words prior to and including 1919 and inserting in their place more than including 75 years prior, which Mr. Morash wants to eliminate that from the article. This, I suggest, is clarification about what would happen if that change was made. And I don't know who made this document, but they did it carefully because they correctly said that as amended, section 3A would read, the provisions of chapter 22 shall not apply to any building which is owned by the town, a building listed on the National Register, or any building which in whole or in part was built more than and including 75 years prior. So if we do this amendment, it nonsensically makes chapter 22 applicable to newer buildings, not older buildings. And I said the person who prepared this document did it carefully because I checked the bylaw and they're correct. What the warrant has in it different language than this. If you look at the language in the warrant that says as amended, section 3A would read, as amended, section 3A would read, incorrectly states what the amendment would do and adds a sentence which is necessary to make the whole thing make sense. And they've added a sentence, the provision of chapter 22 shall apply only to the following buildings. That sentence is in between this provisions of chapter 22 shall not apply to the town, and then it says it shall apply only to the following buildings. So these two provisions become what the Chapter 22 applies to, not what it doesn't apply to, which is how it reads right now. So I'm in favor of Mr. Morash's amendment, but I think he needs to add that the sentence that's, I suggest, improperly included in the warrant needs to be added to the bylaw to make it make any sense, or else we're amending the bylaw to apply to new buildings, not old buildings.
So I want to make sure, yeah, if you could you're just saying that.
No, this is correct. If you look at the current bylaws, the sentence that is included in the warrant, the provisions of Chapter 22 shall apply only to the following buildings, that's not in the bylaw. It should be.
So your point is this is new language that's being inserted in the bylaw, and by removing one of those sections.
My point is that the summary in the Article 4 that says as amended Section 3.A would read includes a sentence which is necessary for the whole thing to make sense, but that sentence isn't in the bylaw, as this summary properly states.
Okay.
Unless there's a later article that addresses the lack of bylaws being updated, but I'm going on the bylaws that are available online. We need a sentence that's in the Article 4 and it's in the Warrant Committee's recommendation that would be the provisions of Chapter 22 shall apply only to the following buildings, which needs to come before Roman numeral 1 and 2, or else we're making this thing apply to new buildings, not old buildings.
I see. Okay. Then why don't we take that as a question, is what's the impact of adopting this amendment on the...
Well, I guess I want to amend the amendment, Mr. Moderator.
Well, there's one way to do that. First, we'd have to propose that to Mr. Morash as a friendly to his. But why don't we take a minute and just get some clarification on this before we start amending too many things. Yes, sir. Can you point to the language you wanted to delete? That's in there now. It's in there, but you want to delete that. So we can revert it back to what it was before. He wants to delete that small ion.
But that doesn't revert it back to what it was before.
Okay. Well,
That's actually your amendment to completely change the product.
okay. Okay. Folks, we've got an answer. Thank you for your patience. So, Mr. Morash, if you're ready. So, what Mr. Chinman has proposed is a friendly amendment to Mr. Morash's motion to amend, which means it's Mr. Morash's purview to accept or reject it as a friendly. So, Mr. Morash, if you understand the change as proposed, would you?
I do,
repeat?
Mr. Moderator,
Thank
and
you.
I accept it as a friendly amendment to my amendment. So that should read, Section 2 would now revert back to any building which in whole or part was built more than and prior to and including 1919.
So is that clear to the audience? We're on page 20. We're in that small paragraph II that's in parentheses. Mr. Morash is saying retain that paragraph now, but modify the language per his comment. Is that clear? And that you've now accepted that as a friendly amendment.
Yes, Mr.
By the way,
Moderator,
since
thank
it's Mr.
you very
Morash's
much.
amendment to amend, it does not require the support yet of Selectmen, Historical, Warrant Committee, et cetera.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Moderator.
So now we have.
Thank you, Mr. Chinman.
So I think we have. Do we have a second to Mr. Morash's? Now we now have a motion to amend. Is it clear to the body what we're discussing? Okay. Anyone wish to speak to the motion to amend to Mr. Morash's language? That was not you. No. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Joe Sloan, Precinct 10. I will just ask for additional clarification. My question was going to be if that the section II referring to 75 years prior is in fact amended to be omitted, would we in fact revert to that 1919 language? Because if not, then the only buildings that would apply the way this is written are buildings that are currently on the historic register or eligible to be on the register. So I think we need a very clear definition of that.
So, Mr. Marsh, if you could do me a favor, could you put down on a piece of paper exactly the language you are amending for us? Because we do need to get that correct for the record. I don't see where Mr. Morash went. There he is. He's writing. Okay. Meanwhile, does anyone else wish to speak to the motion to amend while he's writing that down? Yes. Ms.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Cheryl Tagayas, Precinct 9, member of the Planning Board and Chair of the Master Plan Implementation Committee. I worked on the master plan for probably 5 years and on the Planning Board for 3 are in my third year. And the most consistent thing that I've heard is how people love the character of Milton and they want to protect the character of Milton. And what do we think provides the character of Milton? Is our historic architecture, our historic structures. This is the only tool the town has to consider preservation. It doesn't prevent demolition. It just buys time to consider whether preservation is a viable option. So I think it's important to think about that relative to the character of the town. The year 1919, what makes that better than 1920? What makes it better than 1925? So the date can seem somewhat arbitrary, but as time moves forward, that date becomes important too. My home was built in the 1950s. It's what's considered mid-century modern. There are people now who are looking to preserve mid-century modern homes. If we hadn't bought it, there was an offer on our house to tear it down and build a center, enter colonial. That might have been okay, but we wouldn't have the mid-century modern. So please, let's give ourselves this tool. Thank you.
Mr. Morash, can you read your precise amendment, please?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Steve Morash, Precinct 2, Section 2, or subsection 2, will read any building which, in whole or in part, was built prior to and including 1919.
It's very clear.
May I speak to that one more time, Mr. Moderator? Very briefly.
Is anyone else, no one else is waiting, so yes, you want to speak to that motion to amend? Okay, then yes, you're up.
I would also point out, as my friend Mrs. Tagaya said, look at what's in Section 1, or. It does not preclude anybody in this town board to say that a building is either listed on the National Register of Historic Places or the State Register, or which has been found eligible for listing on the National Register. I would point out, I believe, having a daughter who's a historical architecture historian, there are a number of houses, mid-century, even built after 1919, that fit that requirement. God love Frank Lloyd Wright. So I think it's covered by that, and I urge the town meeting to pass and vote yes on this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Anyone else who wishes to speak to the motion to amend? I'll just read it again. So we're on page 20, II. Any building which in whole or in part was built prior to and including 1919 is the new amended proposed language. Do we have a comment from the Historical Commission and the Selectmen and then the Warrant Committee on this?
We again would oppose the amendment. It's very nice to have buildings on the National and State Register. There are too many buildings in town to even think about that. Please defeat the amendment.
Mr. Burns.
David Burns, Precinct 2, Chairman of the Board of Selectmen. The Board of Selectmen voted unanimously to reject the amendment, believe in the preservation of the town, and believe that only a small number of properties are actually affected. Per Steve's presentation, we feel that this will continue under their auspices, and we urge you to support this article. Thank you.
Warrant Committee, do you have an opinion?
George Asher, Chair of the Warrant Committee. The Warrant Committee unanimously rejects the amendment and votes against its recommendation.
Okay, seeing no one else, I'm sorry, we're still on the motion to amend, right? Haven't forgotten you. All those in favor of the motion to amend, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed say no. No. The motion to amend fails. We're now back to the motion as written in your warrant on page 20. And sir, I think you're up. Right?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Sean Fahey, Precinct 9. One consideration that hasn't been mentioned yet, but I think is worthwhile for the group to consider. The number of homes that were presented up here, and I think the percentage was 58% of the homes would fall into this 75-year benchmark. I think that for any person that had a home that fell within that category and you were a potential seller of your home and your potential buyer of your home had to consider that your home had some type of historical restriction on it, I think it could affect the value of the property and your ability to sell. Any type of alteration, construction, renovation work today is fairly challenging and restrictive as it is, and to have the added burden of a historical condition placed upon it, I think you could find yourself in a situation where the ability to sell your home could be adversely affected. My home was built in 1970, so I guess I'm not going to have to worry till I'm about 82 or 83. But that's not the case for an awful lot of people in town. So it's a consideration I think this body should consider. I would be in favor of Mr. Morash's position to remove that particular part of this article.
Just to be clear, Mr. Fahey, that's ship sailed. So I'm sorry. I thought you were waiting to speak to the primary motion.
No, Mr. Moderator, I thought I was not trying to speak to the amendment or the friendly. I was trying to speak to Mr. Morash's original position. That's what I was trying to speak to.
Okay. Mr. Sloan, you've been sitting there. Are you done? Okay. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Doug Hine, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 2. I just want to bring something up. We're all kind of using the phrase building and home as if they are the same thing. They are not. When we say building, that could be the detached garage that you have that was built in 1955 and in a few short years will be historic. So recall that. If you want to someday replace your garage, it will fall under the purview of this article. Now, I think the other larger and perhaps more problematic issue is what about commercial buildings? Again, because these are not just homes, they're buildings. Let's say, for instance, there was a comprehensive mixed-use property that was envisioned for a street in Milton, perhaps Blue Hills, and it received overwhelming support from the town and the voters at large that has a building on it. The Historic Commission, if I understand it, could utilize the power of this article to say, well, we got to study that issue. So the folks that want to build a Trader Joe's or somewhere else or something like that, you're going to have to wait 2 years to possibly get a demolition permit. So realize the power of this. Now, I don't know when, and I'll just say it, the Ice House building was built. If that's before 1919, it could be subject to this. So I wish I'd thought of this before we defeated Mr. Morish's motion, in which case I would have yelled a little louder. But just consider that.
Thank you. Mr. Fazzetti?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Steve Frazzetti, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 7, and member of the Board of Cemetery Trustees. And I was just wondering if someone could answer the question, for all the reasons given tonight, why it's important to preserve historical buildings, why the town and municipal buildings are exempt from this, because I would think that they would also have some historic value.
Mr. O'Donnell, can you answer that question for the meeting?
The only answer I can give to that specific question is that's the way the bylaw was written 10 years ago. I wasn't on the commission 10 years ago. One of the former speakers, I will just follow up, this indeed includes all buildings, not just homes, commercial buildings, barns is something which frequently come before us. And the loss of every barn depletes Milton's rural heritage.
I'm trying to see, are there some folks over here who do want to speak?
Genevieve Martland, Precinct 4. I just wanted to, I think 60% of us started to panic when we saw the numbers up on the board. My house was built in 1920. I like it. I don't think you would consider it historically relevant. And I think that that was a gist that I got from the presentation earlier, that a lot of our homes were built well before the threshold that's been mentioned. And they're beautiful, and I love my home. But again, I don't think it would be considered historically relevant to the town, and I think that that's what we're thinking about here. There are beautiful buildings in this town, and we need to think about preserving them and making sure, especially as time moves forward, that the houses continue to be considered and looked at well after that 1920s threshold. Time is moving forward. Our homes are getting older, and there's some beauty in them. So I hope that you support this article. Thank you.
Mr. Gaius.
Cheryl Tagayas again, Precinct 9. I just want to make a comment that I forgot to make earlier in response to another speaker who said that we have zoning codes that don't allow us to build ugly buildings. I would just like to comment that the zoning code does not dictate design. It only dictates dimensional criteria and use. So for a single family home that doesn't come before the planning board for a special permit, you have setbacks away from the property lines and you have height limits. It doesn't tell you anything else about what you can design. So the likelihood that you're going to get something of a high quality historic home that's been built today, there's no guarantee of it, folks.
Ms. Friedman Hannah.
Karen Friedman Hannah, Precinct 2. Since it was mentioned, I am curious about the specifics of the Ice House project, how this will impact that if this were to be voted on. If you could answer that, because several of us are talking about that, wanting to know if this will alter that going forward in any way if this is passed.
Mr. O'Donnell.
I have no idea. Nothing to do with the proposed Ice House project has come before the commission. I don't know. I would assume that certainly with the 75 years that the buildings on the project site would come under review. Whether or not they would be found historically significant, or if they were found to be historically significant, if they were found to be preferably preserved, is yet to be determined.
Just a sec, Mr. Cork. I'm trying to go to our town bodies first. The planning board have an answer on this one, or any idea since you brought this motion in May? No. Okay. Then, Mr. Corcoran, you've got an answer for us.
Several of the buildings, Ned Corcoran, Precinct 3, and I was the attorney who brought the Ice House project before this body. Several of the buildings predate 1919. They go back to 1870s. They are subject to the demolition. They're subject to the process. My expectation, my hope would be that given this body's overwhelming support for the enactment of that bylaw, that the Historical Commission would be cooperative in its review and would not determine the buildings to be subject to demolition delay. We're still awaiting word from the Attorney General's office that the bylaw has been approved, but once that happens, the process will begin at some point beyond that. Thank you.
Thank you for the answer. Does anyone else wish to speak to this recommendation? Seeing none, we're back to the original article as written. All those in favor of the recommendation of the Warrant Committee, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no? No. The motion fails. We are now on Article, people are standing? 1, 2, 3. We have 7. Okay? So folks, if 7 town meeting members stand in order to request a recount, then we're going to do a recount. Let me just confer with the town clerk on some assistance, and we'll begin that process. In section 1 over here, could I have Peter Mullen and Ruth Baltopoulos? In section 2, Kathleen O'Donnell and Leroy Walker. In section 3, I'm sorry, I don't know the last names, Clunan and first names Clunan and Murphy. And Mary Rife, could you help with Mr. Mullen over here? So do we have our 6 proctors? Nope. Are you missing your, is Leroy Walker still here? Yes, there's Leroy. And over in section 3, Murphy and Clunan, are you here? Nope, we need 2 other volunteers. Can I recruit the Irwin? No, I'll keep Gene Irwin and... Ma'am, can you help us count? Sure. All right, folks, we're going to have a standing count. I want to make sure all the town meeting members have come down into this section below the rail up there. So what we're going to do is if you are in favor of the article, you'll stand in your section. The proctors will count, and then we'll have you sit down. And if you're opposed, the proctors will count, and we will tally all that up, and we'll find out if what the majority says. So all those in favor of the recommendation of the Warrant Committee, please stand. Okay, do we have proctors? Do we have everybody counted in your section? Yes, okay. All those opposed to the recommendation, please stand. Proctors, do we have our counts? Okay, everyone can have a seat. So, Section 1, could you call out your yeas and nays, please?
Section 1, yes, 31, no, 23.
Thank you. Section 2? $54 and 30. Okay. And Section 3? That was 15 and 23. Thank you. Okay, the count came to 100 ayes, 76 nays, so the motion carries. You up for a few more? We are on to Article 5. I will read this briefly and make a quick explanation. To see if the town will vote pursuant to Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 71, Section 16D, other enabling law, and the Blue Hills Regional Technical School District Agreement to express its disapproval of the debt authorized by the Blue Hills Regional School District School Committee for a project renovating the 50-year-old Blue Hills Regional Technical School District school building and to act on anything relating thereto. It was submitted by the Board of Selectmen, recommended that the town vote no. So this may be confusing, and by the way, we have a couple of speakers here. But this is a statutory language that you see in the article. So, since the article reads disapproval, and the warrant committee is recommending a no vote on the disapproval, if you are in favor of the warrant committee recommendation, you will end up approving the money. Everybody got that? So if you vote aye, we approve the money. Mr. Town Council, is that correct? We're voting on the recommendation. The recommendation is to vote no. So I'm sorry, I spoke wrong. No means you approve the debt. I stand corrected. Yes means you decline the debt. So I said it wrong. Sorry, didn't read my own notes. So if you vote no, we'll spend the money. If you vote yes, we will decline to spend the money. Okay, with that, we have a short presentation by, normally it would be Festus Joyce, who's our representative of Blue Hills Regional Technical School. But he is ill tonight, so we have presentations by Stephen Moore and James Qualia, who are officials with the Blue Hills School. They're going to speak to us about this item.
Good evening, everyone. It's nice to be back in front of you again. I'm James Qualia. I'm the Superintendent Director of your Regional Technical School, Blue Hills. With me is Assistant Superintendent Stephen Moore, who's our Assistant Super for Business and Personnel, as well as Carl Franceschi. So if anyone recognizes Carl, that's because he was the designer for this high school project years ago. First, I will address the school's renovation project from a needs and benefits perspective, and Mr. Moore will address the financial needs, and Carl will be here for any technical questions if there are. So we submitted 6 statements of interest with the MSBA before we were picked up, knowing that the school was just getting older and systems were failing. Stated simply, our facility is structurally sound, but most of the systems are tired and at the end of their useful life. Also, no major addition or renovation has been undertaken since the expansion of the school in 1974. The rest of the facility is 50 years old or more. Failures of major systems such as HVAC, and I will give you one example of that. In the last 3 years, 2 of those winters have seen a major failure of HVAC. Also, of failures of the PA system and electrical systems have become more common in the last few years. These are just a few needs of the school facility at present. Blue Hills will not ask for what we do not need. In fact, when this project was initiated, commensurate with interest in us from the MSBA, we held 2 things to be paramount. One, fiscal discipline in order to be responsible to our member towns, and the second, nothing would be in the project that didn't need to be in it. There are a lot of educational items that would be nice to have, but they will have to wait while we address more pressing infrastructure needs through this project. So rather than a new facility with its staggering costs, which are well in excess of an average of over $500 a square foot, we are operating at slightly under $300 per square foot for a renovation. So we choose to do the following. Thank you. There we go. So some of the actual components of this project are, yes, when you do reach a certain threshold with your project, it does trigger ADA compliance. However, we choose to want to move in this direction to make the school more accessible for everyone. Next, please. There are some rather large chunks to this project. One of them is everything to do with improved life safety and fire suppression. The building, when it was built, because it's of a certain age, it didn't require any fire suppression. Now it does. Next, please. This is probably the largest chunk of the project itself, is the HVAC system. That's where most of the failures have taken place, is in the heating loop throughout the building. There's also new code requires a certain amount of makeup air, so there's going to be an awful lot of rooftop units along with the univentilators and a new heating system. But keep in mind that we did keep our boilers that were installed 12 years ago because we are trying to be cost efficient. Electrical systems, there are 2 feeds that come into the building, one for the new building and one for the older building. And by new, I mean 1974, so it's relative. And there was a major failure of one of the underground cables. So a lot of the electrical infrastructure needs to be replaced. Next. This is probably the more visual part of the project, which is new facade, new entries up around the soffit. All of the windows and window walls will be replaced around the building to make them more efficient and more energy efficient in particular. Next. One thing we did in order to be prudent with the cost is we're only replacing 2/3 of the roof, and 1/3 we're going to be able to have it re-warrantied. Next. And this is there are some educational benefits. I don't want to make it seem like the project is all about infrastructure, but the infrastructure side is also affected by IT and telecommunications. There needs to be a replacement of the entire network, including all of the servers, the fiber backbone, and all of the newer intelligent switches. Although we are not in this project, we're already a one-to-one school with Chromebooks, and most schools do have some type of devices for most of their students now. So there's none of that in the project. There's none of this. There's very little money for such teacher stations and such. It's mostly infrastructure. And finally, The HVAC has a lot to do with improving the climate. I can tell you that the school is very much like my office in particular goes from thinking you're in a sauna to freezing, depending on whether the sun is beaming through the windows or not. It's very, very poorly regulated. There are students that walk around with a parka either on or under their arm during the day because there's just such wide swings in temperature throughout the building. And finally, there is a certain amount of renovation in the locker rooms, lockers, and athletic areas. Quite a bit of the sports locker rooms are the lockers are completely rusted out and need to be replaced. I mean, it's an older building, and a lot of things do need to be replaced and new systems put in place. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm going to pass this off to Steve Moore, who's going to talk about the all-important financial part of this. Thank you.
Mr. Moore, if you could keep it to about 3 minutes, please.
3 minutes, perfect. Steve Moore, Assistant Superintendent, Blue Hills Regional Technical School. $84.6 million. It's not a cheap project, but I hope you're going to understand as you deliberate tonight that it is a great investment in your technical school. It's a great investment for your students, so this building can continue to go forward. $3.4 million is the cost to Milton with interest over 30 years. The first payment will not start until 2020, and we're projecting that at $86,000 additional assessment. That's based on a 3% interest rate, and that the bank is telling us that that is doable. Also, the district will be reducing the borrowing costs are about $2 million a year to repay. The district has $600,000 in a capital fund that it's been using to improve the building for the last 20 or 30 years. We'll be able to take some of that money because we will have a lower need for capital improvements, put that in to reduce the borrowing costs. So the projected range for the 20 years borrowing to the town of Milton will be $86,000 in the initial years and would top out at $115,000 as the project progresses. Next slide. How the calculation is figured out for what Milton will pay of the share of the $38.6 million that the district will end up borrowing is its average enrollment for a 4-year period. So you can see that Milton's enrollment has roughly been a little over 5, almost 6% of the total school population. I can't tell you what it's going to be in 20 years. I can show you what it's been. So the cost should be fairly stable in the near future and going into the distant future. So just last slide. Why this project? Why now? First of all, with the MSBA reimbursement, this is the lowest cost option you're going to get. The MSBA is giving us a true 50% reimbursement. Any delays on this project or deciding to chunk it out into smaller projects, we're facing a 5% escalation in project cost each year. So a 1-year delay would add $3 to $4 million in the project cost. MSBA is giving us $43 million. They don't care when we do it. We're getting $43 million. Any cost escalation is 100% borne on the member towns. Our master plan facility study done 6 years ago says the repairs need to be done. The systems are failing. It's a 50-year-old building. You know from your homes, when things get old, stuff starts to break. That's what's happening here. Eventually, the building won't be able to support your students and the programs that they need. And then lastly, it's 2017. This building needs to be accessible to everyone. It is not. And we also need to upgrade and protect your investment in this school by putting in the life safety systems, the fire extinguishing systems, and everything necessary to make your students safe and this building to continue to last for 50 years. And finally, these repairs allow the school to continue its mission of educating the students of Milton who have chosen a vocational education. Thank you for your no vote on this article.
Mr. Giuliani.
Frank Giuliano, excuse me, Precinct 3 and former superintendent of schools. And I was up here and I've been retired for 23 years or something like that, I don't know. But I was here to recommend that we join the Blue Hills Regional Vocational School, and you did vote that. And it's very, very important for our kids to have this opportunity. As I understand it, we have about 50 students in this program. And, my own background is academic, mathematics, and stuff like that. But I also know how to do plumbing and electricity. I own houses that I rented out. And those skills are so important that you don't normally get in a normal public school. And here we have a vocational school that allows these youngsters to pick up these skills and work and get good jobs and feel good about themselves. It's so important. Now, I don't know, I know because we just did all our buildings over. Every single building in this town is relatively new. That was for our academic kids. Now we have youngsters who are in the vocational school who need the same kind of support. I don't know all the details of the building, and maybe the Board of Selectmen know why they said no to this. There must be something that in the building construction or whatever. I'd like to know why they would say no when they would say yes to our children who do not go to the vocational school. But it's very, very important that these kids get their education, get their skills, go out in the workplace, right? Now, they also go into the college level also. There are youngsters who go to the vocational school who also go into the universities. But basically, these jobs are very, very important to them, and I would expect you to support them just as you supported the programs when I was a superintendent of schools and when Mary was a superintendent of schools. Thank you very much.
Mr. Burns.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and thank you, Dr. Giuliano. Actually, it's the opposite. The Board of Selectmen supports this, okay? So we are encouraging a no vote. We feel that Blue Hills Regional Technical School provides great opportunity for our community, and that, we don't know what the future lies ahead, and to take away opportunities from some of these kids in our town who may want to have a trade, it would be really difficult for us to not support that. So we are in support of this and urge a vote of no. Thank you.
Mr. Corcoran, were you waiting to speak? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Ned Corcoran, Precinct 3. It's not ordinary that the families of kids at the Blue Hills Regional get well represented in the process of these discussions. Our youngest is a junior at Blue Hills Regional. He's adopted. He has different learning requirements. Blue Hills Regional has been an extraordinary place for him. I'm also an assistant rugby coach there. I coach rugby here at Milton High. I coach at Blue Hills. They're phenomenal kids. We voted as a town several times to raise our own debt ceiling to fund our schools. This is one of our schools. There's a bus that comes through Milton every morning at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock and picks these kids up and takes them to Canton and drops them off at the end of the day. My son is in a culinary program, but there are 17 different shop programs that are available for these kids. They go to class for a week, they're in shop for a week. They have homework that's due on the following Monday during shop week, and then they go back into regular class week. They take all the same courses that our students take at Milton High School. They also have shop, and it affords them a different way to learn, and it affords them skills to take on beyond that. A number of the kids there go to college. Some go to regular four-year schools, some go into specific schools that are dedicated to the types of learning that they've had, but it is an extraordinary program, and I would urge this body to support the recommendation of the selectmen, vote no, so that we can support the funds that are necessary to support this project. Thank you.
And Mr. Walker, McLean, and then Frazetti in that order.
I have kind of a compromise proposal. I'm in support of the Blue Hills Technical School, as most of you are. And I agree with both Dr. Giuliani and Mr. Corcoran that this certainly warrants our support at some point. The concern that I have in comparing the proposal that we've seen to what you normally receive from your public schools here, and drawing on the experience that I've had on your Capital Improvement Planning Committee, in every single case, you receive detailed information about what the various projects are. You receive detailed information about what the cost of those projects are. You receive a debt service schedule if you're being asked to take on capital debt. And most importantly, you receive a chart that tells you what the impact to Milton taxpayers is. So, while I think that in general it sounds like these are good investments, I would say to you that we have an obligation to understand very clearly what the debt service schedule is and what the impact on Milton taxpayers is before we approve the proposal. Thank you.
Mr. McLean.
Good evening, Mr. McLean. Lee Michael McLean, Precinct 10 Town Meeting Member. Mr. Moderator, I'm seeking clarification on what a yes and a no vote by the body will mean, and I want to use an example. I support the expenditure of money for the Blue Hills School, and as a town meeting member, I am voting to either accept the recommendation of the warrant committee or reject the recommendation of the warrant committee. If I vote yes, then I am agreeing with the warrant committee for a no. If I vote no, then I'm rejecting the recommendation of the warrant committee. I think we need to think this through because I think we have it backwards.
So I will defer to town council for that answer. It's a good question.
Mr. Moderator, town meeting members, the article is perhaps confusing, but the reason it is because the way the statute is worded. The enabling statute for this is Chapter 71, Section 16, and it says that it talks about a proposal like this from your regional vocational school district. And it says, if at that meeting a majority of the voters present and voting express disapproval of the amount authorized by the district committee, the debt shall not be incurred, and it goes on to explain the process in other towns. This is not a misprint. The warrant article is properly drafted. It's phrased in the negative, but that's because of what the general court decided. The comment of the recommendation of the warrant committee is appropriate because your warrant committee is asking you to vote no on a question of whether to disapprove of the district school committee's request for money. It is proper under the statute, and the warrant committee's comment explains it properly. If town meeting votes yes on the article, you have disapproved the request of the Blue Hills Regional School District. If town meeting votes no on the article, you have said no to disapproval. You have said we approve of the request. Don't shoot the messenger. That's the way our general court worded it. But the warrant is correct, the recommendation is correct, and the comment of the warrant committee is correct.
Mr. Morash, I think you were next.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Yikes. I support this. In the words of Bill Russell, they're all our kids. And these kids are our kids here in Milton as well, and they deserve our support. I'd like a clarification. In the last couple of sentences in the first paragraph of the comment, a no vote will result in no action by the town on the request. In early November, a formal request will be made by the regional school district to each of the member towns in the district. Each town will then have 60 days to act on this formal request. If no action is taken by the town within the 60-day period, the town will be deemed to have approved the request. My friend, Mr. Walker asked, what is this really going to cost us? So my question is, if we vote no to this, and I intend to vote no on this request tonight, are we saying we will have another presentation by the school board for the Blue Hills to this town meeting, and then within 60 days of that presentation, are we coming back to town meeting to approve funding this project?
Let me see who
Or
can
by
answer
doing nothing, do we just sit on our hands and this gets done? It's a done deal, and we have not met our fiduciary responsibilities to this town's taxpayers.
I'm sorry, there's pointing, so let's have a consult here. Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Answer a couple of questions. The way the Massachusetts legislature wrote the legislation on this was that towns had our school committee voted on September 19th to request approval from the towns. But actually, by requesting approval, the action is that we're requesting no action, so that there is no required action to support this by any of the legislative bodies of the member towns. The only action that the state requires is a no vote, to say, no, we do not approve the borrowing. So a number of our communities are not having town meetings, so they have by default approved this. This will be our only appearance here because the time limit for this runs out on November 18th. So that's when the 60-day sunset. So if this town meeting tonight were to take no action, not vote at all, just pass on the amendment, then unless you reconvene at another time to vote, it would be deemed to have passed by the fact that you did not take a negative action. So the warrant article is written to request a negative action, whereas you want to reject that. At least that's our opinion at Blue Hills. Does that?
I understand what you said. But, Mr. Moderator,
Yeah,
my question still stands. By voting no and going along with the recommendation of the warrant committee tonight, is this body approving this project moving forward with no further information?
Can I have town council, can you answer that for us?
Mr. Moderator, town meeting members, a couple of members have asked that same question. Because of the way the statute is worded, in my opinion, if town meeting votes no, that is your way of saying, we do not disapprove of this request, we approve of it, and the process will go on. But you are on record as saying, we vote no on a request to disapprove it, because that's the way the statute's worded. So to say it another way, if town meeting is in favor of the request that the Blue Hills Regional District Committee has put before you, then the proper vote is no because of the way the statute's worded.
So, excuse me, Mr. Flynn, I'm not sure that quite answered Mr. Morash's question. So perhaps I might help. So if I'm looking at the paragraph in the top of 22, it says, I'm looking at the last two sentences, 2/3 down in that top paragraph. A no vote would result in no action by the town on the request. In early November of 2017, right, a formal request will be made by the regional school district to each of the member towns in the district. Each town will then have 60 days from then, which would go to something like, at the worst case, January 31? No, November 18, to act on that request. If so, that will happen before the May town meeting, Mr. Morash.
Correct.
Which means that we will approve the authorization of the debt tonight with a no vote, and there will not be another chance for this body to vote before the May town meeting. Is that correct?
That's correct. Just if I could add one thing. Also, the debt itself is being taken on by the regional school. Milton will be assessed for the debt through the operating budget of Blue Hills. So there is no borrowing that Milton is doing. There's no debt schedule associated with Milton. there is a debt schedule associated with the district. The numbers that I gave you are the estimated costs. We're looking at a level debt model over 30 years to do that. So that's in the 85 to 119, I think, range that I showed you earlier. So it's part of it. It's an operational budget expense.
Mr. Moderator, I'm still troubled with this word, with this sentence. In early November, a formal request will be made by the regional school district to each of the members' towns in the district. Is this the formal request with no money behind it? I wish it would be this easy to build these schools.
Let me try to find out. Let me pause a minute and just see if we
I'm
can get
reading
this.
it 3 times. Please clarify that for us.
Yeah, this is the formal request this evening to this body. We will make the same request to all 9 communities. Should one community say no, then under Massachusetts law, chapter 71, section 16D, then we are not authorized to do the borrowing. However, the legislature did put another option in there, and that is a district-wide ballot referendum. So should one community vote now, whether it's Milton or one of the others, the district then would have a district-wide ballot referendum as soon as possible, because it fights the cost escalation if we can do it quickly. And then it's a simple majority of all 9 towns. It's not one town's vote, it's all 9 towns. So it's everybody in the district, one vote more in favor, and it passes, and Milton is on the hook for the cost at that time as well.
So early November really means mid to late October. Correct? And
That is
after we
correct.
take this vote tonight, it says this town has 60 days to act on that formal request. Yes?
Just a second.
And if we do nothing, then it says in 60 days,
No.
we say yes, we're going to go along with this project.
By all, may I?
Yeah, please.
By all of our legal counsel advice and everything else, this is from MSBA, this is from our counsel, from everything else. Everyone says the 60 days commences with the vote of the school committee, not 60 days from tonight. Not that November wording in there is cloudy, and I don't think it holds any water because it's not adhered to that way. Otherwise, everyone would have to have their votes scheduled within a time frame that isn't necessarily realistic to them, so that when the school committee voted on September 19th, I believe it was, yes, that commenced the 60-day period, which ends in the 3rd week of November.
I agree with you, sir. This is very convoluted and not clear at all. And I would tell you, if I came before this body with a motion this clear, I'd be outside that door in the exit. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Frizzetti, I think you were waiting. Is that right? Sorry, if anyone is not trying to speak, if you could step away from those first 2 aisles, that would be helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Steve Frizzetti, town meeting member, Precinct 7, and member of the Board of Cemetery Trustees. I fully support doing the renovations at the Blue Hills Vocational School. I myself am a product of a vocational school, not that one in particular, but another one in the area. And it is important that our kids learn these skills if they desire. My problem is you're spending a lot of money on HIVAC, IT, there's some plumbing. Aren't these skills that we're teaching the kids? And is this labor that the kids can be doing?
Yes, that question comes up very, very often. Can we get the students involved in this? They are not licensed professionals. They could never perform in that environment. They are in no way prepared to start on that level of production. In fact, they can't even legally work alongside of any of the trade unions or any of the licensed contractors that would be involved. They can certainly observe. It can be a teaching environment for them because you're bringing a large-scale project to them. But there are actually a couple of things that can be done, and one of them in particular is and I've discussed this with our design firm and with our owner's project manager. For instance, our carpentry program. If they needed 500 feet of milled handrail, and instead of procuring that, if it were produced in the school, that's something where we're actually producing supplies for the project. But when you get into labor, it's incredibly dicey, and we would not be able to cross that line. Thank you.
Thank you. Ma'am?
I'm Myrtle Flight. I come from Precinct 5, and I taught at the Blue Hill Regional School for over 20 years. It was a great experience because when I first went there weren't any girls, and when I left, we had about 250. So it's not just the male laboring people who are the professionals in keeping our houses going, helping to build, taking care of our property, that have benefited by their education at the Blue Hill Regional School. It was a different experience. It was not anything that one could train for because we had many deaf students come through. We had many who were very difficult to handle. We had many charms. We had many who went through the electric program and came out and got their, whatever their certification is. Honestly, it was 20 years ago, so more than that now. And I can't remember what they actually got, but they went out and they did get all of the certifications that they needed. And in the carpentry program, we really have a great credit to give to Festus Joyce, who is a Milton town person and taught there. Festus was one of the greatest teachers, and that's what made the difference in his pupils. And that's what makes a big difference in the pupils who go to the Blue Hill Regional School. Now you can have your hair done. And I bet you could have it cut if you were a man, if that is what you wanted. It's just a great school. Some of our students in the health services program, which was the program that I was involved with, went on and became doctors. We had many nurses. These are young people that probably may have gotten into trouble in another environment, but they were just a part of the school and they enjoyed it, and we need to support it. Milton has not had to spend a great deal for the maintenance, etc., of that school. It's your students, it's my students that went through, that came through. And you know, one day I went into a restaurant and there was my most unbelievable student. I was invited to have breakfast with him. I was invited to meet his children and his wife. And it was just a great experience. And it's your experience too, because Milton has supported this in the past, and we need to support them now.
Mr. Zulis, did you want to speak? Yes.
Mr. Moderator, Mike Zulus, Precinct 3, Town Meeting Member. I apologize if I'm being obtuse, but I just want to make sure I get this right. If I want there to be a no vote to approve the debt, a no vote to approve the debt authorization, then I want to vote aye to accept the, well, hold on. Don't I want to accept the recommendation of the warrant committee to vote no, or have I got it wrong?
Nope,
Okay.
I'll repeat. You vote no.
I want to
for
vote
town
no
council.
to accept the no recommendation of the warrant committee?
Well, let's
I just want to
keep
vote
it
no.
simple.
Oh, I see. So there's no aye. I see. Got it. All right, so I was being obtuse. That's now clear. I got it. Thank you.
Ms. Agostino, you're next.
Diane DiTulio Agostino, Precinct 9, Town Meeting Member and Chair of the Commission on Disability. I completely understand why everyone seems confused. And during the school building projects, Mary Gormley will probably attest that I asked more questions about the funding, about the construction, and everything else. And I'm standing here tonight to say I am voting no, in agreement with the warrant committee, to make sure that this town allows the Blue Hill Regional School that has waited, 6 years for this project? Because if you do a little bit of reading to understand the background, and it's all in there. And I'm always questioning the money. This school must move forward. What's different now is that we have a Massachusetts School Building Authority. The authority has done all the due diligence. So in a way, it seems like, they're just walking in here saying, give us, by the way, they're getting 55.9% reimbursed by the state, so they did their homework there. But this new building authority even reviews who the design committee was and everything. So I would suggest that we follow forward, move on, vote no, get this school up to speed, because I think it really is a great little secret where many students excel, and I thank you all for the work you're doing to improve it, especially the ADA accessibility. Thank you.
Mr. Fahey.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Sean Fahey, Precinct 9. I also rise to vote no, which, as I've written it here for myself, a no vote is yes for the funding. I am the president of a commercial construction company, and every single day we see a continuing decline in the number of tradesmen that exist in the marketplace today. As Ned Corcoran said earlier, I think Blue Hills Regional offers an avenue for kids that prefer not to have an academic college experience, and gives them an opportunity for a tremendous career in whatever trade they choose. So I am in favor of a no vote and providing funding for the school. I have two questions on the business side of it. I find myself also very cost conscious, and $85 million is a big dollar value. One, I'd like to know, how has the cost of the project been determined? The article does read, is expected to cost $85 million. So I would like some definition on how we've arrived at an $85 million value. One of the speakers earlier had spoken to the fact that there's very little detail on this dollar value. And my second question is, if the project cost changes, what happens to the assessment of the town of Milton? If the project cost goes down, does our assessment go down? If the project cost rises, does our assessment rise?
Yes, Mr. Qualia.
Thank you. The cost of the project, I don't know why it says 85, but the actual, you saw it on the first slide that come up here, it was 86.8. That is a fixed number. There's a contingency built into that, so that there's actually a possibility that it could come in under that if we do not need to attach all of the contingency. And before I go much further, those of you that have technology at your access right now, renovatebluehills.com, www.renovatebluehills.com. almost every single detail that you would need to know is there, including all of the meeting minutes that we've had from the very beginning. So the cost doesn't change. And the reason why it won't change is because it can't. It can't. There's no way that once an agreement is made with towns that you come back and ask for any more money. The only way that the amount that a town would be assessed through their budgetary request every year would be if the population trends differently over time. The population it's a 4-year average, and it rolls over time. So that 4-year average may change. However, if you looked at the figures that Mr. Moore had up on screen, you'll see that roughly 5.5% has been the average over the last several years. So you can probably count on that going forward, which means that there will be no radical change through that mechanism. So the answer is no change will happen. That's what we work within. That's the figure that's set for the project. Absolutely no higher than that.
All right, I see 2 to 3 speakers, and I'd like to go to a vote. So, ma'am, in front row.
Renate Voigt, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 2. I think most of us are in favor of a no vote. I do feel that we do have a fiduciary responsibility to really get the numbers. And when I was on the warrant committee in the early 90s, we asked that we get some balance sheets and some budget line items, and we were told that, if Milton did not vote the budget, then we could not participate in the program. Since we have such 2 distinguished gentlemen here, I just hope in the future that we get some numbers and a budget for future town meetings so we can give the budget the same scrutiny that we give all our other departments. Thank you.
Ms. Gankarski.
Joan Gankarski, Precinct 1. Moderator Hiss, you have just mentioned this. I would like to call the question.
I agree. Town Council, you want to speak? Just a minute. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we'll go to a vote. To remind the audience, a yes vote means you disapprove of the taking on of the debt. A no vote means you approve of the taking on of the debt. Is everyone clear on that? All those approve it? All those in favor? Let me get the wording right. I want to get the wording right. All those in favor of the article as written, please say aye. All those. Hang on. The article says disapprove. Right? Okay. Town Council.
I think I'm going to need a police escort to leave here tonight. But please bear with me. This is slightly different from what, it's the same intent, but, and a member just raised that, and I apologize for not, the moderator's fifth rule, which you operate under, does talk about a no vote. And the gentleman who made that point, thank you for making it. And that's what the colloquy was about here. So the moderator suggested, and I agree with the suggestion, that he will explain it this way. All those in favor of the warrant committee's recommendation to vote no, please say aye. Several of you have asked that, and I apologize for the confusion.
So, here's what you're going to do. You're thinking about this for a minute. We apologize for the language left with us in the statute. So I'm going to say the words, all those in, don't answer yet, all those in favor of a no vote on the article, on the recommendation of the warrant committee, I'm going to say it right, say aye. I said, don't say it yet. Yeah. False start. Okay. All right. And then if you are opposed to the no vote, so you'll end up disapproving, you'll say no. Okay? Double negative. That's right. All those in favor of a no vote on the recommendation of the warrant committee, say aye. Aye. All opposed? The motion carries. Entertain a motion to recess till tomorrow night. Seconded. All in favor, aye. We are recessed.